Alien woman cries out in disgrace. Take me as your slave, human. The ship glided through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming with a low, steady rhythm. Captain Alex Wraith sat at the helm, his eyes scanning the distant stars through the cockpit window. His mission was simple: make the trade, get the supplies, and return home. He had done this 1,000 times before, a routine that had become second nature. But as the ship docked at the bustling space station on the edge of the galaxy, something caught Alex's attention. A commotion in the busy marketplace below drew his gaze. He saw a group of alien figures pushing through the crowd, their faces twisted in anger. They were dragging someone who didn't seem to belong. Alex's curiosity piqued, and he moved toward the observation window, watching closely. The alien woman being dragged was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. She had pale blue skin, long silver hair that shimmered under the artificial lights, and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intensity. Her face, though weary, carried a certain grace, a beauty that seemed almost tragic in its despair. The crowd moved aside as the aliens pulled her toward a central platform, where a small stage had been set up for public executions or displays. Alex's stomach tightened. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the woman was treated, as if she was nothing more than an object, a thing to be discarded. Then, to his shock, the woman's voice broke through the noise of the crowd. It was a soft cry, but the words were unmistakable, resonating through the universal translator. "Take me as your slave, human," she said, her voice filled with desperation and humiliation. Alex froze. The words hung in the air, a strange weight settling in his chest. He didn't understand what had brought her to this point, but something in the way she spoke, so broken, so vulnerable, made him feel something stir within him. He had seen many slaves in his time, but this was different. There was a plea for mercy in her eyes, a silent cry for help that reached beyond language and species. Without thinking, Alex found himself moving. His hand gripped the controls, and his ship detached from the station's docking port. He didn't know why he was doing it, but he couldn't ignore the urge to help this woman. She had asked him to take her, to make her his slave, but Alex didn't know how to respond. He was no savior, no knight in shining armor. He was just a man, a captain of a cargo ship who was used to being alone. The woman's captors noticed Alex's movement. They turned their attention to him, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. They were not going to let him interfere, but Alex didn't care. He couldn't just stand by while someone was so openly humiliated. He had to do something. He made his way toward the landing pad, the sound of his boots echoing through the quiet corridors. The woman's captors saw him approaching, and Alex could feel the tension building in the air. He didn't know how he was going to stop them, but he had to try. He reached for the small blaster at his side, a weapon that was more for show than actual defense. "Stay back, human," one of the captors growled, raising his hand as if to ward off Alex's approach. "This one is ours." But Alex didn't stop. His instincts told him to act, and he trusted them. He couldn't explain why, but he had to save her. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, or maybe it was the sheer hopelessness in her voice. Either way, he wasn't about to let her be taken away. In a flash, Alex's blaster was in his hand, and he fired a warning shot into the air. The loud crack of the shot rang out, silencing the room for a split second. The captors hesitated, their eyes wide with disbelief. Alex used the moment to close the distance between them. He pointed the weapon at them, but he wasn't aiming to kill. He just needed them to back off. "Let her go," Alex said, his voice steady but firm. The alien captors exchanged a glance, and for a moment Alex thought they might back down. But then one of them stepped forward, his eyes burning with anger. "You don't know what you're getting into, human," the alien hissed. "This is not your fight." But Alex wasn't backing down. He had no idea who these people were or what kind of trouble he was getting himself into, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let this happen. Not on his watch. The woman Zara, as she later introduced herself, was trembling, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Alex could see the way her captors had mistreated her. The bruises on her arms, the way her clothes hung from her thin frame. She was fragile, broken, and desperate. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "take me with you. I don't care what you do to me. Just take me away from here." The desperation in her voice was more than Alex could bear. He made a snap decision, a decision that would change the course of both their lives. He stepped forward and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward him. "You're coming with me," Alex said, his voice resolute. The captors weren't going to let them escape that easily, though. One of them lunged at Alex, but Zara, with a sudden burst of strength, knocked the alien off balance. She had been through too much to go down without a fight. "Go!" she cried, pushing Alex toward the exit. "Go now, or we're both dead." Alex didn't need any more encouragement. He shoved the door open and led her out into the corridor, running toward the ship. His heart was racing, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had just done. He had saved her, but for what? He didn't know her story, didn't know who she was or why she had ended up in this desperate situation. As the ship lifted off from the station, Alex looked over at the woman sitting beside him. Her eyes were full of gratitude, but there was something more there, something deeper. Alex couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she had led to bring her to this point. He glanced at her once more as they sped away from the station, her pale blue skin glowing softly in the dim light of the cockpit. Whatever had brought them together, Alex knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. The ship hummed steadily as it sailed through the vastness of space. Captain Alex Wraith sat at the controls, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a focused intensity. His eyes were fixed on the stars outside, but his mind was elsewhere, on the mysterious woman sitting in the seat beside him. Her name was Zara. He had learned that much in the short time since they had escaped the marketplace. But beyond that, Alex knew little about her. She had said she was from an unknown alien race, but her story felt incomplete, as if there were gaps she wasn't ready to share. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had drawn them together. Zara sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars, her expression distant. Her pale blue skin glowed faintly in the dim light of the ship, and her silver hair shimmered as it cascaded over her shoulders. She didn't speak much, only offering him a soft thank you when he had pulled her onto the ship and away from her captors. But there was something in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, that left Alex with more questions than answers. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Alex knew he couldn't keep quiet forever. He had saved her, yes, but for what? What had brought her to this point, begging for someone, anyone, to take her as a slave, and why had she chosen him? "Are you all right?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, but the question lingered in the air. Zara turned her gaze to him, her silver eyes meeting his. She didn't answer right away, as though weighing her response. Her lips parted, but she hesitated, unsure whether to speak the truth or to remain guarded. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was quiet but steady. "I'm alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that's all I can say, alive and nothing more." Alex studied her for a moment, trying to understand what she meant. She seemed so distant, so closed off from the world around her. It was as if she had been through too much, and now all that remained was a hollow shell of who she once was. "I didn't mean to push you into something you didn't want," Alex said, his voice softening. "You said you wanted to come with me, but I'm not sure what you were hoping for. I can't give you everything, Zara. I'm just a captain, not a hero." Zara's gaze softened, and for the first time she let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh. It wasn't a sigh of relief or despair, but one that seemed to carry the weight of years of sorrow. She opened her mouth to speak, but then paused as though trying to find the right words. Sometimes you don't know what you need until it's right in front of you," she said slowly. "I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always broken. I had a family once, a home. My people were once the protectors of the galaxy." Alex's curiosity grew, but he kept his voice neutral. "What happened to them, to your people?" Zara's eyes darkened as she looked away, her fingers curling into fists in her lap. "They were betrayed during the war. The war that no one remembers. My people were guardians, protectors of an ancient power, one that could have shaped the fate of the galaxy. But when the fighting began, we were used, abused. Our power was stolen, and we were scattered. No one remembers us now." Alex felt a pang of sympathy for her, but he also felt something else, anger. Anger at the injustice of it all, the betrayal she spoke of. It wasn't right. No one should have to live through that. "And now," Alex asked, his voice more serious, "what do you want now, Zara?" Zara's eyes met his again, her gaze intense. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know what I want anymore. All I know is that I can't go back. I can't return to the life I had. It's gone. My people are gone." There was a long pause as Alex let her words sink in. He could see the pain in her eyes, the loss, the hopelessness. He wanted to help her, but he wasn't sure how. What could he possibly offer to someone who had lost everything? "We can't change the past," Alex said finally, his voice quiet but firm. but we can look ahead. You're not alone anymore, Zara. I'm not leaving you behind. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. Zara blinked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if she was finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. "Thank you," she whispered. Alex didn't know how much his words had actually helped, but he did know one thing for certain. He couldn't just leave her. He couldn't walk away from someone who had been so broken, so lost, and pretend that nothing was wrong. He had to do something. But what? As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Alex's mind raced with possibilities. What if Zara was right? What if there was something more to her story, something that could change everything? She had mentioned guardians, protectors of ancient power. Was there more to her people than met the eye? He didn't have the answers, but he knew that he would have to find them, and if it meant protecting Zara along the way, so be it. He wasn't sure where their journey would lead, but he wasn't about to let her down now. The days passed slowly as they drifted deeper into space, toward an unknown destination. Zara had begun to open up a little more, sharing bits and pieces of her past. There was still so much she kept to herself, but Alex could see that she was beginning to trust him. Or perhaps she was simply growing more comfortable with the idea of having someone beside her again. But even as the two of them settled into a fragile routine, Alex knew the danger wasn't over. They had escaped the marketplace, but there were still enemies out there. The faction that had captured Zara was not going to give up easily, and now that she was under Alex's protection, they would likely come after him as well. But for now, Alex pushed those thoughts aside. There was time to plan, time to figure out their next move. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. He wasn't just a captain of a cargo ship anymore. He was someone who could make a difference in the life of another person. And that in itself was worth fighting for. The ship drifted through the silent emptiness of space, a tiny speck against the vast cosmic backdrop. Alex Wraith sat at the controls, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The journey had been smooth so far, but there was an undercurrent of tension that neither he nor Zara could shake. They were both aware that the enemies who had pursued them were still out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zara sat beside him, her eyes scanning the consoles, her fingers tapping lightly against her leg. The quiet between them had become more comfortable in recent days, though neither of them knew what the future held. They had spent their time on the ship sharing bits of their lives, trying to make sense of the strange, unexpected bond that had formed between them. Zara had told him more about her people, about their ancient culture and their tragic downfall. She had spoken of the guardianship they once held over powerful, forgotten technologies, technologies that could have changed the fate of entire civilizations. But despite all that, Zara still carried the weight of the past with her. It was as if the loss of her people, her home, had become a part of her, something she couldn't escape. Alex could see it in the way she looked at the stars sometimes, the faraway look in her eyes as if she was trying to remember something she could no longer grasp. "We're not safe yet," Zara said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Alex turned to her, his brow furrowing in concern. "I know," he said softly, "but we're safe for now. We've got a little time." Zara's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Alex could see the pain in her eyes, the scars that went far beyond the physical. She had been through things he couldn't even begin to understand. He had no idea what it was like to lose everything, to watch as your people, your entire race, were torn apart by betrayal and war. He could never truly know what it felt like to have nothing. "We don't have time," she said, her voice tight. "They're still after me. The faction I ran from, they won't stop until they have me, and when they find me, they'll find you too. You're not safe as long as I'm with you." Alex's heart clenched at her words. He had known that the threat was still out there, but hearing it spoken aloud made the danger feel more real. He didn't want to believe that he was in any real danger, that he had been dragged into a war that wasn't his to fight, but he couldn't ignore the truth. Zara was right. As long as she was with him, they were both targets. "We'll be fine," he said, trying to reassure her. "I'll get us somewhere safe, somewhere they won't find us." Zara shook her head, her expression grim. "It's not that simple. They have eyes everywhere. They know where I am. And they're never far behind." Alex's mind raced as he thought of their next move. They couldn't just keep running forever. Eventually, they would have to confront whatever it was that had driven Zara to this point. But how could he protect her from something so dangerous, something that was so much bigger than either of them? He looked at her, seeing the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. She wasn't just an alien to him anymore. She was someone he cared about, someone he had promised to protect. He didn't know how he would do it, but he couldn't just let her go back to a life of fear. He had to find a way to stop this. "We need a plan," he said finally, determination in his voice. "I'm not going to let them get to you. We'll figure this out together." Zara looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm nothing but trouble. I've dragged you into this mess. You should just leave me behind before it's too late." Alex reached out and placed a hand on her arm, his grip firm. "You're not a burden," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving you behind, Zara. I don't care what's out there. I'm not abandoning you." Zara turned away, staring out the window at the endless void of space. Her breath was shaky, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know how to let go of the past," she said quietly. "I don't know how to move on from everything I've lost. Every time I try, it feels like I'm drowning in it." Alex's heart ached for her. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that everything would be okay, but the truth was he didn't know that. He didn't know if they would survive the dangers that lay ahead. He didn't know if they would ever be able to outrun the enemies hunting them. But he did know one thing: he wasn't going to let her fight alone. He sat beside her, his presence steady, a silent support in the chaos that seemed to swirl around them. "You don't have to face it alone," he said, his voice soft. "I'm here, Zara, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since they had met, Zara looked at him with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but the way she leaned into him, the way she allowed herself to relax for the first time in what felt like forever, spoke volumes. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. The ship's alarm suddenly blared, breaking the quiet. Alex's heart leapt in his chest as he quickly turned his attention to the controls. A red warning light blinked on the dashboard, indicating an incoming ship. "Shit," Alex muttered under his breath. "We've got company." Zara's eyes widened in fear as she turned to look at him. "It's them, isn't it? The faction?" Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could already hear the engines of the approaching ship, their thunderous roar growing louder by the second. Whoever was chasing them, they had finally caught up. "We need to get out of here," Alex said, his hands flying over the controls. "Hang on." The ship lurched forward as Alex pushed the engines to their limit. He glanced at Zara, who was gripping the seat beside her with white-knuckled hands, her face pale with fear. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. She was terrified, but she wasn't backing down. "We're not going to let them take us," Alex said, more to himself than to her. "We'll fight." Zara nodded, her expression hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We'll make it through this." The battle for their lives had just begun. The ship rattled as it sped through space, the engines whining under the strain. Alex Wraith's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, his gaze locked on the instruments in front of him. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the pursuing ship grow closer, its shadow looming over them. The faction that had been chasing them was not going to give up easily. "Hold on," Alex muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Zara, who sat tense beside him. The vibrations from the ship's hull reverberated through the cockpit, and he could feel the pressure building. Zara sat with her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window, her expression hard and determined. Despite the fear that still lingered in her eyes, there was something else there now: resolve. The fear of being caught, of being taken back, had faded slightly, replaced by a quiet strength that Alex had not seen before. She had become more than the scared, lost woman he had rescued from the marketplace. She was now someone who would fight for her future, no matter the cost. "We can't outrun them forever," Zara said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to find a way to fight back." Alex didn't look at her as he adjusted the ship's trajectory, narrowly avoiding a barrage of fire from the enemy ship. He didn't need to say anything. He knew she was right. Running was no longer an option, but fighting, that was a different story. The enemy was too powerful, and their ship was far better equipped for a battle than his. "We'll figure something out," Alex said, his voice tight. "I'm not going to let them catch us without a fight." Zara nodded, but Alex could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was trying to stay strong, but the weight of everything she had been through was taking its toll. She had once been a guardian, a protector of powerful knowledge and technology. But now she was a fugitive, no longer the one in control, but the one running from her past. Suddenly, the ship's systems flashed a warning, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. The approaching ship had launched a missile. It was tracking them, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Brace yourself," Alex shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The ship lurched as the engines roared to life, pushing them into a sharp dive. Zara gripped the seat, her face pale, but her eyes never left the window. The missile was almost upon them, its destructive force ready to end everything they had fought for. Alex could feel the heat building as they plummeted toward a nearby planet, the missile trailing behind them. "Now or never," Alex muttered to himself. He spun the ship in a sharp arc, throwing the controls into a desperate, evasive maneuver. The missile locked onto their trajectory, but Alex was not going to make it easy. He pushed the ship harder, twisting and turning as the enemy missile followed closely, inching closer by the second. Zara watched in silence, her hands trembling but steady. She had seen many battles, many attempts to escape, but this felt different. She could feel the tension between them, the fear in Alex's eyes, the same fear that mirrored her own. She had fought for her people, for her home, but never had she been this close to losing everything. As they neared the planet's atmosphere, Alex's eyes flashed with realization. "We're too close to the surface," he said, his voice strained. "We won't be able to survive the impact." Without hesitation, he slammed the emergency release, ejecting the ship's escape pod from the hull. The ship jerked violently as the pod detached, sending the two of them tumbling into the darkness of space. Zara screamed in surprise, but Alex was already strapping himself into the pod's seat. His eyes locked onto the instruments as they fell toward the planet below. The escape pod's automated system kicked in and they were hurtling toward the surface, the countdown to impact beginning in seconds. "We have to survive this," Zara said, her voice quiet but filled with fierce determination. She was no longer afraid. She was ready. The pod descended rapidly, the outside air heating up as they neared the planet's atmosphere. Zara could see the fiery streaks of debris as it burned up around them. The pod rattled violently as the heat shield began to degrade, the pressure inside mounting. Alex didn't speak, his eyes trained on the countdown timer. Every second counted. They were seconds away from impact, but the pod wasn't going to make it. The planet's surface was coming up too fast, and they were too close to avoid the collision. "We're not going to make it," Zara said, her voice trembling though her tone remained calm. "We have to bail out now." Before Alex could respond, the pod lurched violently, the impact sending a shockwave through their bodies. They were still alive, but the pod was severely damaged. The warning lights flashed on the dashboard, signaling that the pod's systems were failing. Zara scrambled to unbuckle her seatbelt, her hands moving with urgency. "We need to get out of here," she said. "We don't have much time." Alex followed her lead, ripping off his harness and pulling himself toward the hatch. The pod had crashed into the jungle-like terrain of the planet, and the impact had thrown them into a dense thicket of trees and underbrush. They were alive, but for how long? The danger was far from over. The pod doors hissed open, and Alex was the first to emerge, his feet sinking into the soft soil of the planet's surface. He looked around, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. There was no telling what kind of wildlife or hostile factions might inhabit the planet. "Are you all right?" Alex asked, turning to Zara as she emerged from the wreckage, her eyes scanning the dense jungle with a look of determination. Zara nodded, though she looked visibly shaken. The crash had been close, too close, but she was alive and so was Alex. For now, that was all that mattered. "We need to keep moving," Zara said, her voice low and steady. "We can't stay here, they'll come for us." Alex nodded. He knew she was right. They didn't have the luxury of rest. They needed to find shelter, regroup, and plan their next move. The faction wouldn't stop hunting them, and now they were stranded on a planet with no way to contact the outside world. But Alex wasn't ready to give up. Not now, not when they had come this far. "Let's go," Alex said, his voice firm. "We'll make it through this." Together, they began to walk through the dense jungle, the sounds of the planet's wildlife filling the air. They didn't know what dangers lay ahead, but they both knew one thing for sure. They were in this together, and they would fight to the end. The dense jungle stretched endlessly before them, the thick underbrush nearly swallowing their every step. Alex Wraith's legs ached as he trudged forward, but he didn't stop. Zara walked beside him, her pace just as steady, though her face was hard with concentration. She had been through far worse, but even she couldn't shake the weight of their situation. They had crash-landed on a planet with no way to contact the outside world, and the enemy faction was still hunting them. They had no time to lose. The crash had been close enough to be a wake-up call. They couldn't afford to rest, and they couldn't let their guard down. Every rustle in the underbrush made their hearts race, and every shadow felt like an impending threat. Zara was the first to speak after a long stretch of silence. "We need to find shelter. Nightfall is coming, and the predators on this planet are fierce. If we don't make it to cover soon, we'll be exposed." Alex nodded, though his mind was still racing. He had been trained to handle danger, to think strategically under pressure, but this was different. This was a fight for survival, no plan, no backup, just him and Zara against the world. "I've got a few ideas," Alex said, his voice low, "but we need to keep moving." They pushed forward, each step taking them deeper into the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of damp earth and unfamiliar plants hanging heavy in the air. Strange creatures rustled in the trees above them, their eyes glowing as they watched the two strangers. Zara's sharp gaze never wavered as she scanned their surroundings, her mind constantly alert for any sign of danger. The sun was sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The temperature was beginning to drop, and Alex knew they wouldn't have much time before it became truly dangerous. But there was something else on his mind, something more pressing. Every moment they spent on this planet, they were closer to being found. The faction would be relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had Zara and Alex along with her. They needed to get off the planet. But how? Zara must have been thinking the same thing because she spoke again, her voice soft but full of resolve. "We can't outrun them forever. Sooner or later, they'll track us down. We'll need to make a stand." Alex glanced at her, surprised by the calmness in her voice. "You think we can fight them?" Zara's expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet certainty in her eyes. "I've been running for too long. It's time to face them. I'll fight, Alex. You don't have to do this alone." Alex felt a surge of admiration for her. She had been through so much, lost so much, and yet here she was, offering to stand beside him in the face of almost certain death. He had no idea how much power she had left, but he knew one thing for sure: Zara was no longer the broken woman he had rescued from the marketplace. She had become something more, something stronger. "I'm not going to let you face this alone," Alex said, his voice firm. They reached the edge of a small clearing, where the dense jungle gave way to a rocky outcrop. It was the perfect place to set up a defensive position. They would have a clear view of anyone approaching, and the rocks would offer some protection. The only problem was that it was too exposed. Anyone with half a brain would know to look here first. "We need to build a shelter," Zara said, reading his thoughts. "Something to hide us from view, something to buy us more time." Alex nodded, scanning the area for materials. There were large rocks scattered around the clearing and a few twisted trees that could provide cover. It would be hard work, but they had no choice. "Let's get to it," Alex said, determination in his voice. "We don't have much time." Together they gathered what they could, branches, rocks, and vines, and started building a makeshift shelter. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving them in near darkness as they worked. Their hands were raw and covered in dirt, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. As the shelter took shape, Alex's mind raced. He knew they couldn't stay here long. Eventually, the enemy would find them, and they would have no choice but to fight. But how could they possibly stand against an entire faction, a faction that had been hunting Zara for so long? "We need to find a weapon," Alex said, his voice grim. Zara's eyes flashed with a knowing look. "I can help with that." She moved toward the edge of the clearing, her movements graceful despite the exhaustion in her limbs. Alex followed her, curiosity gnawing at him. She had said she was a protector, a guardian of powerful knowledge. But what did that mean now when everything had been lost? Zara reached down to a patch of earth near the base of a tree, her fingers brushing against the soil. She pressed down with surprising strength, and the ground beneath her shifted. Alex watched in awe as she revealed a hidden compartment, an old, rusted weapon. "This is from my people," Zara said, her voice tinged with both pride and sadness. "It's an energy rifle. It's old, but it still works. It was meant for defense. Our people were not warriors, but we were always prepared." Alex took the weapon from her, inspecting it carefully. It was heavy in his hands, its sleek design showing signs of age. But it was a weapon, and right now that was all that mattered. "How do we use it?" Alex asked, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. Zara demonstrated, showing him how to load the rifle and how to activate the energy cells. It was simple enough, but Alex could see the sadness in her eyes as she explained the weapon's functions. This wasn't just a tool for survival, it was a reminder of what had been lost. Her people had once been protectors, but now they were scattered, their legacy reduced to fragments. "We'll need to make our stand here," Zara said, her voice steady. "They'll come, and when they do, we'll be ready." Alex nodded, his mind sharpening with focus. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The fight was coming, and he wasn't going to let Zara face it alone. As they finished setting up their shelter, Zara sat down beside him, her eyes fixed on the weapon in her hands. "I don't know what's worse," she said softly. "The fear of being hunted or the weight of knowing I can't undo what's been done. I failed them, Alex. I failed my people." Alex looked at her, his heart aching with empathy. "You didn't fail anyone," he said firmly. "You're still here, you're still fighting, that's what matters. You're not alone in this." Zara met his gaze, and for the first time since they had met, she seemed to believe him. She nodded slowly, as if accepting the truth of his words. The weight on her shoulders didn't disappear, but at least, for now, she wasn't carrying it alone. The night was closing in around them, but the shelter they had built offered some measure of protection. They weren't safe, not yet, but they had a chance, and that was all they needed. As the jungle noises echoed around them, Alex and Zara sat in silence, their backs against the rocky wall of their makeshift shelter. The fight was coming, but they would face it together.